Andrew Kerr is joining me once again. He is an investigative reporter for the Daily Caller News Foundation. Andrew, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me back on, Samantha.
Back on March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization officially declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. This outbreak had, of course, been going on for months prior in China. What role did China play in suppressing information about COVID-19 early on in the pandemic and even throughout the last year?
We need to look back at the very early stages of the pandemic. The first known cases happened around early December. China was actively suppressing information about the pandemic. We seem to forget that China arrested and interrogated the first doctors in Wuhan that were speaking out about the virus. Because this was happening right around the time of the Chinese New Year. It's a very important holiday. It's often the only time that Chinese people can take a break from work and go see their family. So the last thing that the local government in Wuhan wanted was people panicking about a new deadly virus. And so they did everything they could to suppress information and try to reduce panic. Unfortunately, that led to the situation getting out of hand in Wuhan. When the World Health Organization was first started getting involved with the pandemic around early January, they were almost entirely reliant on information from China. Back then, the World Health Organization they were coming across as just stooges for China. They were praising their flexibility, their transparency in the matter. But we knew even then that wasn't true. And at the Daily Caller, we did a lot of reporting on the World Health Organization acting like they were just in the pocket of China. That led to President Trump cutting funding for the World Health Organization because of their connections to China. So I think that when we're looking at these later investigations into the origins of the virus, whether it came from animals or if it was connected to a lab in Wuhan, we need to remember that we need to have the proper frame of reference that China has not been transparent about the virus. They've held control over all the information surrounding it. They've been very secretive regarding allowing people to come in and investigate where the virus came from. They were arresting people at the very early stages. That needs to be kept in mind.
So you brought up the lab leak theory, and early on in the pandemic, it was thought to be a conspiracy theory. It wasn't something that was taken very seriously, but now it's becoming a more viable option in terms of, where COVID-19 actually came from. So can you walk us through how we actually got there?
During the early stages of the pandemic, there were three theories that were thrown around immediately. So one was that this was just a natural spillover, from Chinese bats to humans. A second theory that started being thrown around, internet sleuths in the dark corners of the internet noticed that there were labs in Wuhan that were studying bat-based coronaviruses before the pandemic, notably the Wuhan Institute of Virology. When we look at the circumstantial evidence, we still don't know where this virus came from. But we need to take into account that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was studying bat-based coronaviruses. They were conducting dangerous experiments on them in which they were modifying the viruses in a laboratory setting in an attempt to try to get ahead of any future pandemics. The bats that COVID-19 is suspected to have originated from, they live, hundreds, if not 1,000 miles away from Wuhan in southern China. So how did that virus get to Wuhan without really any known, there's no trail of people getting sick, in between. So if people were getting sick, they would have had to been asymptomatic, which is unlikely. So how did that virus get to Wuhan? We know that the head of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, their top researcher, Shi Zhengli, she's known as the Batwoman, or the Bat Lady. She told the Scientific American early on in the pandemic that the first thought that came through her mind was, oh my gosh, did this thing accidentally leak from my lab? So when we take all that into account, this is definitely worth questioning whether whether the lab had any connection to this outbreak. Bat-based coronaviruses have accidentally leaked from Chinese labs before. The original SARS virus from 2004 accidentally leaked from the Beijing Institute of Virology at least 2 times in 2004. And we also know that based on reporting from the Washington Post, that the State Department officials with the American Embassy, we know that officials with the U.S. Embassy in Wuhan, they visited the lab in 2018, and they issued 2 cables noting about the safety issues at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So when we take all this into account, the lab leak theory, we don't know if this leaked from the lab accidentally, but it certainly does warrant questioning, especially as an investigative reporter. You can't just come across all those facts and just say, no, it's a debunked theory. It's not. Unfortunately, at the beginning of the pandemic, we started seeing all these reports, all these fact checks saying that anything involving this lab is bunk. An American scientist by the name of Peter Daszak, he's the president of a group called EcoHealth Alliance. He organized a statement in the Lancet Medical Journal that got a bunch of scientists together and signed an open letter saying, condemning conspiracy theories that suggested that the virus had a non-natural origin. And essentially what he was trying to do, and emails have been released showing this, is that he was really pushing hard to absolve the Wuhan Institute of Virology of any connection at all with the virus, and saying that we know that this had a zoonotic origin, and nobody should be questioning any conspiracy theories related to the lab. And what that did in the media, or what members of the media did, was then they often cited that letter and used that letter to debunk the conspiracy theory that the Wuhan lab was working on a bioweapon and they intentionally released it. And they conflated that with the legitimate theory that perhaps this lab, which we know that was studying back coronaviruses, that there could have been an accidental lab escape. So the media was conflating those 2 theories together and pushing these fact checks, saying, anybody that's even talking or suggesting that the virus could have accidentally leaked from this Wuhan lab, that's just a debunked conspiracy theory. And that's where we were for much of 2020.